challenge, and if necessary, destroy media narratives of George Samueli. And yes, it is that time of the day, namely the Tuesday night Gaggle live stream. Welcome, everybody who has joined me. And there's a few things to get to today. Obviously, not a huge amount happening, but it's worth going over it. So, as you know, and we discussed this yesterday during the live stream with Peter. President Trump returned from his summit in China, and he started, as per usual, issuing his threats that he's about to resume the bombing of Iran. And we were just thinking, what is it going to be this week, next week, later today, whatever? And as it happened, and perhaps it's not too surprising, as Trump yesterday issued a truth saying that he was delaying the any attack on Iran. So he sent out this truth, but he ascribed the reason for the delay to the entreaties that had been that he had been subjected to from the various Gulf powers. So let's just take a look at what it is that Trump said in his truth. So here we have, I have been asked by the Emir of Qatar, Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman Al Saud, and the President of the United Arab Emirates, Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, to hold off on our planned military attack of the Islamic Republic of Iran, which was scheduled for tomorrow. So, tomorrow being, of course, today, in that serious negotiations are now taking place, and that, in their opinion, as great leaders and allies, a deal will be made which will be very acceptable to the United States of America, as well as countries, all countries in the Middle East and beyond. This deal will include, importantly, no nuclear weapons for Iran. Based on my respect for the above mentioned leaders, I have instructed Secretary of War Pete Hegseth, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Daniel Kane, and the U.S. military that we will not be doing the scheduled attack of Iran tomorrow, namely today, but have further instructed them to be prepared to go forward with a full large-scale assault of Iran on a moment's notice in the event that an acceptable deal is not reached. And obviously, thank you for your attention to the matter. Now, there are a couple of interesting aspects to it. I mean, obviously, yet again, Trump kind of walks up to the edge and then backs away. What it's striking that he claims here that he's really backing away because of these pleas from the leaders of the Gulf kingdoms. Now, one of those leaders is, of course, the president of the UAE, and as we know, there's no love lost between Iran and the UAE. In fact, we now know that the UAE has been involved in the attacks on Iran, and of course, Iran has hit the UAE very hard, and that should the United States reignite the bombing of Iran, Iran obviously will retaliate against the UAE. It will absolutely hit targets inside the UAE much harder than it had previously. So it is understandable why the UAE should be anxious for the United States and Israel not to relaunch their attacks. So it's not because they think that a deal is very close and that, in their opinion, as great leaders and allies, a deal will be made, which will be very acceptable to the United States of America. It's that they don't want to get clobbered. Now, the other thing is, of course, he says here, based on my respect for the above mentioned leaders. Now, we know that Trump, of course, has no respect for any of these leaders, because if he did have respect for these leaders, he would not have undertaken this attack on. On Iran in the first place, because they obviously didn't think that this was a great idea. I mean, these kingdoms, and particularly Saudi Arabia, all they really want to do is to make money. And of course, this is what Trump promised them when he made his now famous visit to the Middle East, his first trip abroad, both during his first term and in his second term. His first trip was to the Middle East. He visited Saudi Arabia, he visited UAE, visited Qatar, and he spoke about all this investment that was coming both to those countries and the investment that they would um, make on in the United States, and that all the conflicts on the past, all the religious, sectarian, Shia versus Sunni, Persian versus Arab, Palestinian versus Israel, all of those conflicts will be long in the past, and everyone will be busy with the only enterprise that is worth pursuing, namely making lots and lots of money for everybody. And that was obviously what the message that he imparted. And of course, that's the message they wanted to hear. But instead of everybody making money and doing very nicely, Trump and Israel decided launch their war against Iran, and 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 of course, Iran, as entirely was to be expected, Iran launched the attack against America's Gulf allies. So for Trump to say, "Oh, I have this huge amount of respect for them," well, you obviously don't have respect for them, because if you did, you wouldn't have done this. Uh, Obviously, that would be he's now saying, "Oh well, we kind of we're not going to do this for the time being because I have such respect for you." Well, you don't have respect. These kind of, I mean, uh, Qatar Qatar's LNG industry has been thumped, hammered. Its GDP is expected to decline by something like 9% this year. The UAE has been seriously clobbered. So, Trump did this without consulting them. Of course, he wouldn't consult them. I mean, these are supplicants. Why would he consult them? They're just people with money, but they don't wield any power. So, of course, Trump didn't bother with them, and he just went ahead and launched these attacks. So obviously, all of this is entirely dishonest, and therefore, this cannot possibly be the reason why Trump yet again decided to call off his attacks. And of course, the reason why Trump decided not to do this is the same as before. He's unlikely to succeed with whatever goal that he's setting himself. Unlikely to effect regime change. If he was going to get the regime change done, he would have got it done on February the 28th, when in that first wave of strikes, pretty much the entirety of Iran's political, military, security, and intelligence leadership was wiped out. That would have been the moment to bring about the collapse of the rule of the Ayatollahs. That didn't happen. So since he missed the bus on that occasion, he really hasn't had much of a second act. So he's gone on, trying this and trying that, but he's not really getting anywhere. So he moved towards a ceasefire on April the 7th. So that's now was 6 weeks ago. So yeah, three, yeah, that's 6 weeks ago. He's threatened during those 6 weeks to restart the attacks. During that time, of course, there's been the blockade, and he still doesn't really have any idea of how to achieve any of his objectives on Iran, and Iran knows this, and therefore Iran isn't bothering to negotiate anything very much because, as Iran sees it, I think reasonably so, um, he they've got the United States over a barrel. United States launched this attack without having thought things through, without having a plan B, and now um, Trump wants some kind of a face-saving exit, and Iran doesn't want to provide him with a face-saving exit because Iran wants some kind of a long-term agreement or long-term guarantee that the United States and Israel aren't going to come back and do this again in a few months' time. So therefore, they're in no mood to negotiate with Trump unless Trump is ready to make serious concessions, which he obviously isn't prepared to do. Now, the New York Times had a rather different take on why Trump, again walked up to the precipice and then back down again. And the take, I think, is a much more reasonable one, which is the Trump's military. And remember, the Trump's military, even before the start of this campaign on February the 28th, the Trump's military had been telling Trump, and we know, that they were obviously leaking material to the media. They were telling him, I don't think this is a great idea. Iran is not going to be a pushover. Iran is not Venezuela. And these strikes are only going to entrench in Iran's leadership, and will only serve to rally the public around the clerical regime. And so this is what they obviously were telling Trump this, and they were leaking these stories to the media. So now again, the military is telling Trump Iran has an awful lot in its armory, and we really haven't taken out that much. They'll still be able to retaliate, and then when they retaliate, they're going to start hitting our Gulf allies particularly harshly, and particularly the case of the UAE, but may also be Saudi Arabia, certainly Qatar, certainly Kuwait, and they're going to get really thumped. They're not going to go after the United States. They're not going to go after Israel, but they will go after the Gulf kingdoms. So going after Israel for Iran isn't such a great strategy because, of course, Israel does have nuclear weapons, and Israel is ready to use nuclear weapons. So if Iran were to hurt Israel very seriously, and I think Iran has that capability, Israel could well retaliate using nuclear weapons, and Iran obviously doesn't want to do that. So Iran's best bet, and that's the one that they're going with, is to hit America's allies in the Gulf. So here was the story in the New York Times, which is, here we are. Trump threatens Iran and then pulls back, all in the same day. And then here, this is they're quoting Trump saying, we were getting ready to do a very major attack tomorrow, and I put it off for a little while, hopefully, maybe forever, but possibly for a little while, because we've had very big discussions with Iran, and we'll see what they amount to. And then it goes on. So I was called by these three countries plus others and they're dealing directly with our people, and right now Iran, and there seems to be a very good chance that they can work something out. So again, good chance they're going to work something out. If we can do that without bombing the hell out of them, I'd be very happy. Bombing the hell out of them. All right. Then it says Mr. Trump did not specify what targets the United States had planned to strike on Tuesday, but officials said the military had developed a variety of options, including targeting the country's ballistic missile sites. And then earlier on social media, Trump said he had told his top military officials to prepare for a full, large scale assault of Iran if an acceptable deal is not reached. So, same old, same old. And then some U.S. officials cautioned that Mr. Trump's public pronouncements could be a form of misdirection and that he could still move ahead with strikes. So that's very interesting because, of course, because Trump has broken his word so many times, because Trump has shown himself to be so untrustworthy, the Iranians may well think, hey, this could be misdirection. So this is U.S. officials are saying this. So this is the U.S. official. This is not the Iranian official. These are U.S. officials saying this could be a form of misdirection and that he could still move ahead with strikes. So if U.S. officials don't really believe anything Trump says, can you imagine how the Iranians feel? Well, why should we sit down and talk if Trump is going to clobber us? This will be the third time we would be clobbered. And then the officials noted that in February, American and Iranian officials planned a round of negotiations just days before the United States and Israel started the war. Yes. Iran has used the months-long ceasefire with the United States to dig out scores of bombed ballistic missile sites, move mobile missile launches, and, despite significant losses, adjust its tactics for any resumption of strikes, said the U.S. military officials. So this is very important. The New York Times has now run a number of stories along those lines, suggesting that Iran has retained much of its ballistic missile capability. They've moved them around. They have a number of them underground. They've moved around their mobile missile launchers, and they could just absolutely come back and clobber, particularly the UAE, with which Iran has long had a very difficult relationship. And many of Iran's ballistic missiles were deployed from deep underground caves and other facilities carved out of granite mountains that are difficult for American attack aircraft to destroy. As a result, the United States largely bombed the portals of the sites, collapsing and burying them, but not destroying them. Iran has now dug out a significant number of these sites. And then Iranian commanders, possibly with Russian help, studied the flight patterns of American fighter jets and bombers. The official warned that the downing of the F-15 jet last month and the ground fire that struck an F-35 revealed that American flight tactics had become too predictable in ways that allowed Iran to defend against them more capably. Perhaps most important, the U.S. military official said that while 5 weeks of intensive bombing may have killed several Iranian leaders and commanders, the war has left a more hardened, resilient adversary. The official added that the Iranians had repositioned many of their remaining arms and instilled a belief that Iran can successfully resist the United States, whether by effectively blocking the Strait of Hormuz, attacking energy infrastructure in neighboring Gulf states, or threatening U.S. aircraft. And that shows and this is the headline. This was an important story. I think it appeared last week. U.S. intelligence shows Iran retains substantial missile capabilities. And then here it is. The Trump administration's public portrayal of a shattered Iranian military is sharply at odds with what U.S. intelligence agencies are telling policymakers behind closed doors. And then they show this intelligence is showing that Iran has regained access to most of its missile site launches and underground facilities. Most alarming to some senior officials is evidence that Iran has restored operational access to 30 of the 33 missile sites it maintains along the Strait of Hormuz, which could threaten American warships and oil tankers. And then people with knowledge of the assessment said they show that the Iranians can use mobile launchers that are inside the sites to move missiles to other locations. In some cases, they can launch missiles directly from launch pads that are part of the facilities. And so on. So you can see here that the reason why Trump has once again backed away is that he's getting warning. Hey, we hit Iran hard; they're going to really hit us hard, and they're going to hit the data centers, and particular data centers in the UAE, but throughout the Gulf, and that is going to hurt not just the economies of the Persian Gulf states, but the economy of the United States. And this would be an absolute catastrophe. So, Trump was not persuaded by what the UAE said, what Qatar said, what Kuwait said. We know that's not the way Trump operates. And as I said earlier, and we know that's not the way Trump operates. Is that he went ahead and and launched his attacks on February the 28th without bothering to consult anybody. So that's that's that. All right, so that was one item. Now the other thing, which was I think quite interesting and might be worth taking a look at, is this the tension that is now developing between between Russia and the Baltic states. So, if you recall, I think last week we discussed these various drone incidents that have manifested themselves in the Baltic states and Finland. And of course, there's been all the hysteria about the, drone this and drone that. And of course, they blame, initially, everyone was blaming Russia. It's all Russian drones, they're part of their hybrid warfare, Gerasimov doctrine, all this other nonsense. But now it's become apparent that these drones are not of Russian origin at all, but that these drones are Ukrainian. Now, this, of course, immediately raised all sorts of questions. So you'll recall we did this, we covered this on the Gaggle last week, where the government in Latvia has fallen over this very issue, whereby the drone, this Ukrainian drone, landed on an oil storage depot. A couple of them landed on oil storage depot, and then it had landed on a power plant. Well, the Latvian prime minister then fired the defense minister by declaring, "Oh well, he somehow had allowed this situation to develop, and he had left Latvia unsafe, and so she fired him." And of course, that meant that the government fell because her coalition partners, from whom this defense minister had been hired, they said, "Hey, this is really unfair. You're blaming him. I mean, he was pursuing your policy." Now, the reason for all of this finger pointing is obvious. And it's obvious from the fact that we've had all of these drone incidents. In all of these Baltic states, we had these drone incidents. These drones are all of Ukrainian origin. And never, not once, had any of these drones been shot down. Remember, we had all the hysteria with Poland. Oh, well, Russian drones, we're shooting them down. We're sending NATO up in the air to shoot down these drones. And yet, in one case after another, nothing was shot down. Well, obviously, it's because the Baltic states and Finland had given their permission for Ukraine to use their airspace to launch attacks on Russia. And they had obviously believed that doing so would come free of charge. They wouldn't have to pay a price, and why not? I mean, NATO's obviously been helping Ukraine with provision of military hardware, ammunition, all kinds of new weapon systems, intelligence, money to pay for everything, money for the budget and everything else. I mean, so why not provide our airspace so they can launch their attacks on Russia? And why not indeed? So but the problem arose that either Ukraine had deliberately targeted strategic locations in these Baltic states, such as oil depots or power plants. Either Ukraine had done this deliberately in order to provoke a NATO-Russia war. So then therefore, that these attacks could be ascribed to Russia, and then Article 5, we're at war. United States come in and fight Russia on our behalf, which is obviously the Ukrainian plan. Either that or Russia, that is possible. Russia used GPS jamming to push Ukrainian drones onto the Baltic states and then target strategic locations in the Baltic states. So that's a possibility. Either way, it's the responsibility of the Baltic states and Finland, don't forget Finland, to have avoided this situation. So it was fun initially. Well, we could just blame this on Russia, but now they know these are Ukrainian drones that have been landing on their territories. And of course, this really raises a particularly awkward problem, because of course Russia very reasonably has accused the Baltic states of using their airspace for Ukraine to launch attacks against Russia. And that by doing so, the Baltic states and Finland are parties to the conflict. Contrary to NATO's protestations, they are parties to the conflict. And as parties to the conflict, they are indeed liable for Russian retaliation. So this has now caused some panic within NATO. And clearly today, it seems like all hell broke loose, both from the part of Russia and from the Baltic states. So what happened initially was that Russia's SVR, their Foreign Intelligence Service, issued a statement claiming that they had evidence that Ukraine was planning to launch drones from the territory of the Baltic states themselves. Now, I should say right away that I have no particular faith in anything Russia's SVR says. They talk an awful lot of crap, and most of their statements have turned out to be false. But nonetheless, it was interesting that they issued this statement today, a day on which a NATO fighter jet shot down a Ukrainian drone. So this is just keep this. NATO fighter jet shot down a Ukrainian drone in Estonia. And I remember NATO is happy to shoot down Russian drones. They did that apparently in Poland last year. But now this is the first time that a NATO aircraft shot down a Ukrainian drone. So this is on the same day that the SVR issued this statement. So let's first of all take a look at this statement from the SVR, and here you have it. Ukraine is preparing strikes against Russia from Latvian territory. And the press bureau of the Foreign Intelligence Service of the Russian Federation reports that, according to information received by the SVR, the Zelensky regime is determined to demonstrate to its ideological and financial patrons in Europe the continued combat potential of the Ukrainian armed forces and their ability to damage the Russian economy. It is with this in mind that the Ukrainian Armed Forces Command is preparing to launch a series of new terrorist strikes against Russia's rear regions. According to the information received, Kiev does not intend to limit itself to using the air corridors provided to the Ukrainian armed forces by the Baltic states. Drones are also planned to be launched from those countries. The hope is that this tactic will significantly reduce flight times to targets and increase the effectiveness of terrorist attacks. Despite Latvia's fears of becoming a target of a retaliatory strike from Moscow, Kiev authorities convinced Riga to agree to the operation. The Ukrainians emphasized that the precise launch site of the UAV would be impossible to determine. As a result, the abject Russophobia of Latvia's current rulers proved stronger than their critical thinking and sense of self-preservation. Ukrainian armed forces, unmanned system force personnel have already been deployed to Latvia. They are stationed at the Latvian military bases. They go through this list of them. And then we have, one can only sympathize with the naivete of Latvian leaders. Modern intelligence tools make it possible to reliably determine the coordinates of UAV's launch point. Reliable data can also be obtained by examining drone wreckage, as was the case with Ukraine's attempted drone attack on the Russian presidential residence last December. It's worth noting, however, that the coordinates of decision-making centers on Latvian territory are well known, and the country's NATO membership will not protect terrorist accomplices from just retribution. All right, so let's just read that again. It's worth noting, however, that the coordinates of decision-making centers on Latvian territory are well known, and the country's NATO membership will not protect terrorist accomplices from just retribution. Now, that, I think, very reasonably can be interpreted as a direct warning from Russia that it will indeed attack Latvia if it has evidence of Ukraine using its territory, not just using its airspace, but using its territory to attack Russia. So it's possible. It's possible that these Ukrainian attacks on Russia that used Ukrainian airspace were then guided off their path by Russian GPS jamming, and that the Russians managed to push back these drones and to hit targets in Latvia. That's quite possible. It was that was as a result of Russian GPS jamming, or it may have been an attack by Ukraine. But it was striking that when the Latvian prime minister, the one who's now out of office, that she fired the defense minister. Why did she fire the defense minister? Well, the defense minister hadn't done anything to protect against these drones. Well, why didn't he do anything to protect against these drones? Well, we know why. Because the government had given approval to the Ukrainian drones flying over their territory. That was the point. And in a way, the firing was a kind of post hoc attempt to create an alibi. You're caught with a sort of a knife in your hands, and then you want to create an alibi subsequently that to show, oh yeah, well, I picked up the knife. I didn't know what it was, and I didn't know who it belonged to. It was, but I'm sorry, but I don't know nothing, and so that's why she had to fire the defense minister. But so this is the warning issued by the SVR, and then, as I say, on the same day there was that this Ukrainian drone was shot out of the sky by a Romanian fighter jet. Again, Romania just happens to be flying around there at the same time, as part of a NATO operation. And there was also a debate at the UN Security Council where the subject of Russia's warnings to Latvia came up. So let's take a look at, first of all, what happened with this Estonian. So here we are. Deutsche Welle story: NATO planes down suspected Ukrainian drone over Estonia. And then a NATO military jet has shot down a suspected Ukrainian drone in Estonian airspace. As Ukraine targets Russian Baltic oil facilities more often and more intensely, more such drones are straying into allies' territories. They always get the story. You can always rely on the media to get the desired story. The drones are just straying, they have minds of their own. They just stray into territory. It's very odd how they can stray into territory because they're guided by satellites. Anyway, NATO confirmed on Tuesday that one of the F-16 jets from the Baltic air policing mission based in Lithuania had shot down a drone over Estonian airspace. Estonia and Latvia both issued air alerts reporting drone in their airspace. It was not immediately clear whether they were referring to the same or different aircraft. Estonia's military said that a drone entered its airspace at around noon local time, entering from Russia into the southeastern part of the country. It was shot down by a Romanian NATO fighter jet on a training flight with a single missile at 12:14 local time. The incident occurred under the condition of heavy electronic warfare, including GPS spoofing and jamming by Russia. The military said it had been monitoring the drone before it entered into its airspace, and that the decision to shoot it down had been taken to minimize the impact on the civilian population and infrastructure. NATO later confirmed that it has shot down a drone over Estonian airspace. All right. And then Tuesday's the latest in the South, and then the Baltic countries have broadly blamed Russia in their public responses, saying that Ukraine has a legitimate reason to attack sites in Russia as part of its defensive war. So here they are. They say, "Oh no, we never gave permission to Ukraine to use our airspace to attack Russia. We really never did." But then they say, "Oh, but Ukraine has a legitimate reason to attack sites as in Russia as part of its defensive war." So why are you saying that if you had nothing to do with any of that? These incidents. This is this Margus Chakna, Estonia's foreign minister. So it says these incidents are the direct result of Russia's war and provocations. Estonia is strengthening cooperation with Ukraine to enhance our air defense and counter-drone capabilities, says the Estonia's foreign minister. Well, this is very interesting because the only defense that you need The only defense you need and the only counter drone capabilities that you need is the air defense against attacks from Ukraine and the counter drone capabilities that you need against the drones coming from Ukraine. And yet you say, oh, we're strengthening our cooperation with Ukraine to enhance our air defense and counter drone capabilities, even though you're not getting attacked by anyone other than Ukraine. And then it says an air alert in Latvia led to disruptions and so on. And then then it says both Latvia and Estonia again said that they had not allowed Ukraine to strike Russian targets via their territory and airspace, something Ukraine's foreign ministry also stressed on Tuesday. Then the ministry spokesman, Hyori Tuhi, apologized to Estonia for such unintended incidents and said that Russia continues to redirect Ukrainian drones into the Baltics in coordination with intensified propaganda as part of an intentional strategy. We reiterate that, contrary to Russian propaganda claims, neither Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, presumably nor Finland have ever allowed to use their airspace for strikes against Russia. Furthermore, Ukraine has never requested such use. Well, that's very interesting. Ukraine has never requested permission for such use. That's probably true. The permission was taken as given. So yeah, well, why would we need? Why wouldn't we need to ask? It's assumed that the permission is there. But then you again you go back to the same issue, which is, well, if these were unwanted drones, then why didn't any of these Baltic states make any attempt in all this time to shoot them down? What happened today is a result of NATO getting involved. And why is NATO getting involved? Well, NATO is getting quite concerned that the Baltic states, the Baltic Chihuahuas, are trying to provoke a war between NATO and Russia. And this is presumably it's coming from Washington, who are saying we're not going to allow this this thing to spiral out of control into a shooting war with Russia. And hence, suddenly today, out of, magically, a NATO fighter jet appears and shoots out of the sky a Ukrainian drone. And then, we have that. Anyway, then we have, this is the AP story, a NATO fighter jet shoots down a Ukrainian drone. And then here we have, given the trajectory of the drone, we decided we needed to take it down, says the Estonian defense minister, adding that it was most probably meant to hit some Russian targets. Well, this is very strange. What do you mean it was meant to hit some Russian targets? You said this was a Ukraine. They're not denying this was a Ukrainian drone. So what exactly? And it was supposed to meant to hit some Russian targets. So what was this drone doing in Estonian airspace? We never gave permission for Ukraine to use our airspace. No, but this drone that was shot out of the sky most probably was meant to hit some Russian targets. Estonian Foreign Minister Margus Tsahkna said in a statement that his country has not granted Ukraine permission to use its airspace for attacks from Russia. Of course, you've got to get the story out. And then here we have The Guardian, also Russian jamming blamed after NATO jet downs Ukrainian drone over Estonia. And then here, this is a Romanian F-16 NATO jet shot down a drone over Estonia on Tuesday in what appears to be the latest case of Russian electronic jamming, diverting long-range Ukrainian drones into the alliance's territory. Well, that's interesting. How do they know this? It's noticed everyone gets the story out, and you have to put that's the story that you've got to get out, because somehow we can still blame this on Russia, and then we can move away from the uncomfortable story, which is that the Baltic states had allowed their airspace to be used to attack Russia, which would not be a problem. No one would have thought that's any sort of a problem whatsoever, unless the United States had said this is a problem. And that's where this is coming from. It's the United States is making clear that they're not going to get dragged into this war by playing these stupid games. And hence, suddenly they've come up with this story about the Russian electronic jamming, and that we never gave any permission, and suddenly they're shooting down drones. A local resident told the Estonian public broadcaster that he had seen two fighter jets, part of a NATO force policing the skies over the Baltic states, flying in the area before a loud bang that brought the drone down. He said the drone had crashed about 30 meters from the nearest residential building. After analyzing its trajectory, we decided we needed to take it down. And then this is, the defense minister said, a spokesperson for the Ukrainian foreign minister said, we apologize to Estonia and all of our Baltic friends for such unintended incidents. We have been and remain in close cooperation, and so on. And then he blamed Moscow for the incident, of course, saying that Kiev had been aiming at legitimate targets in Russia and that it had never attempted to use Baltic airspace for its drones. And so on. And then here's the Edgar Rinkevich, who is the president of Latvia. He says, Russia is lying about Latvia allowing any country to use Latvian airspace and territory to launch attacks against Russia or any other country. Now, this is really a case of, methinks the lady doth protest too much, because you're saying Russia is lying. We would never, never, never dream of allowing our airspace to be used to attack targets against Russia. Why wouldn't you? I mean, here these Baltic states have been the most belligerent, the most bloodthirsty, the most aggressive, the most hysterical of all of the states of Europe when it comes to Russia. They're the ones who are always calling for some new measure against Russia. Sanctions, send more arms, and so on. And now, heaven forbid that we would ever even dream of allowing our airspace to hit Russian targets. Really? Really? After everything you've said and done, you would never dream of allowing it. That's how you know they're lying. The fact that they're protesting with such vehemence that, we would never have dreamt of ever doing anything so horrific. Imagine using our airspace to attack Russia. These countries want a war with Russia like yesterday. So you know they're lying. And here, that's the president of Latvia. And then this is this guy, this Margus, we just quoted him, Margus Chahna. He is the foreign minister of Estonia. And he says the downing of a drone that entered Estonian airspace proves one thing clearly. NATO works. NATO works. So, all right. So let's pass that a little bit. NATO works in that NATO has shot out of the sky a drone that was produced by NATO. Now, it was either manufactured under NATO auspices in Ukraine, or it may have been manufactured under NATO auspices in some other NATO country, and then shipped by NATO into Ukraine with the goal of using the drones to attack Russia as part of the goal of pursuing a proxy war on behalf of NATO against Russia. And then he says NATO works because NATO decided to call a halt to this because this was a dangerous situation that was threatening to spiral out of control, and may indeed spiral out of control. So NATO works. NATO shot out of the sky its own damn drone. And here that we have, this is NATO works. Romanian F-16s responded immediately from Shalwai, demonstrating that allies stand united and ready to defend every inch of NATO territory. Grateful to Romania and all of our NATO partners for their swift action and solidarity. All of our NATO partners, yeah. So we're all in. We're all with you. Let's also be clear. Ukraine has every right to strike Russian military targets to weaken Russia's ability to wage aggression. Okay, so the downing of a drone that entered Estonian airspace, that proves one thing. And then that Russia has every right. Why are you bringing that up? The issue must have been limited. I mean, you're just claiming this was a stray drone that, you know, flew inadvertently into your airspace. But now you're suddenly saying, oh, Ukraine has every right to strike Russian military targets to weaken Russia's ability to wage aggression. These incidents are the direct result of Russia's war and provocations. Estonia is strengthening cooperation with Ukraine to enhance our air defense and counter drone capabilities. That's how you know he's lying. You know exactly what happened here. Obviously, they were using your airspace. Hence, this Ukraine has every right to strike Russian military targets to weaken Russia's ability to wage aggression. And then, because you were told to knock it off, you're trying to make this out that you somehow, well, you're on the side of the victors. NATO works. And then this Margos Chachna reposted this statement from the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry. Russia continues to redirect Ukrainian drones into the Baltics with the use of its electronic warfare. Now, of course, if that is the case, even if that were the case, that Russia is redirecting Ukrainian drones into the Baltics, then, well, maybe it's not such a great idea to hit. I mean, let's assume that what he's saying is true. Then it may not be such a great idea to hit Russian targets on Russia's Baltic coast, because that might happen. So I mean, you gotta make up your mind what you want to do. And Moscow does this on purpose, together with intensified propaganda. We apologize. We apologize to Estonia. Well, if Russia did this, is Russia very sinisterly, in a very sinister fashion, had redirected these drones onto Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania. Why are you apologizing to Estonia? What you didn't do anything wrong. Why are you apologizing? We apologize to Estonia and all of our Baltic friends for such unintended incidents. We have been and remain in close cooperation between our specialized institutions to get to the heart of the matter in each case and seek ways to prevent them, including with the direct engagement of our expert groups. We reiterate that, contrary to Russian propaganda claims, neither Estonia nor Latvia, Lithuania, or Finland have ever allowed to use their airspace for strikes against Russia. Furthermore, Ukraine has never requested such a use. And then Ukraine expresses its right to self-defense, and the Russians have no right to blame Ukraine, the Baltic states, or Finland for the consequences of its actions. No, these are the consequences of your actions. So it's the consequences of its actions, and so on. And then we have this Margus sends another tweet. Had a good call with Romanian foreign minister today and thanked her for the swift response of the Romanian F-16s from the Baltic Air Policing Unit stationed in Shalwai after a drone entered Estonian airspace. Allies' professionalism and rapid action show clearly that NATO collective defense works. Allies stand ready to protect every inch of NATO territory against NATO. We're protecting it against NATO. This is an attack by a NATO proxy using NATO weapons on behalf of NATO, and you're protecting a NATO territory against a NATO attack. Good work. And then here's the Guardian, in an interview with the Guardian in Tallinn, Shachna struck a similar tone. These are the consequences of Russian war of aggression, and so on. And then Estonia supported Ukraine's right to attack targets in Russia, he said, adding that the two capitals were in constant contact, and Tallinn had asked Kiev to be more careful with its drone routes given the Russian jamming. Oh, drone routes? What are these drone routes? And now we're talking about these drone routes. See, the more they talk, the more they give themselves away. Anyway, the Pevkur, that's the defense minister of Estonia, reiterated after the shooting down on Tuesday that Ukraine had to be careful with its drones. We said to the Ukrainians all the time that if you're attacking Russian position or Russian targets, then these trajectories have to be as far from NATO territory as possible. So why have you said this? You said this all the time, and all the time there were these drones in your territory. Not once, not until today, did you shoot down any of these drones, but apparently you were telling them. So you notice how they're trying to create their alibi. Anyway, and then now there was this debate today in the UN Security Council. And it says the EU's UN representative, Stavros Lambrinidis, he says there should be no doubt in distinguishing between an aggressor and a victim, and so particularly condemned Russia's move to threaten a member of the Security Council and an EU member state in Latvia. So Latvia currently is a non-permanent member of the UN Security Council. Now, well, I have to say, these, it's hard to think of a state less suitable to be on the UN Security Council. I mean, I admit it's only a non-permanent membership, but it's hard to think of a state less suitable to be on the Security Council than Latvia. I mean, this absolute a ridiculous state. I mean, about the size of a suburb of a even smaller than a suburb of any city in the United States, contributes almost nothing to the global public good other than hysterical denunciations of Russia. So this apparently this state gets to be on the UN Security Council. Oh, we have Latvia's on the Security Council, and then and there it is. It takes part in these meetings, and yeah, it doesn't have the right to veto, but its votes are quite significant because you do have to get the votes for the Security Council to adopt a resolution. So there it is. It gets the vote. I mean, how can you put a totally phony state like Latvia onto the UN Security Council? Anyway, so we have Latvia, and then this is the accusations which you often hear in this chamber from the aggressor. The European Union is prolonging the conflict, are a head-spinning distortion of reality on the ground. Well, what the hell else is European Union doing other than precisely that? And then we have, here more on this debate today at the UN. Senior EU and US diplomats condemned Russia's threats against Latvia and the Baltic countries after Russia's representative told the UN Security Council that NATO membership will not protect them from retaliation if Ukraine launches drones against Russia from their territory. So he was basically echoing what the SVR said in its statement earlier. It says Russia's Vasily Nebenzia aggressively floated Moscow's allegation that Ukraine is looking into using the Baltic countries as a launch pad for attacks on Russia. And then Latvia's UN representative dismissed the allegation as pure fiction and pure lies, with Ukraine's representative calling them fairy tales. That's how you know it's true. I mean, when you say these pure fiction, pure lies, fairy tales. Okay, so that means that confirms that it's true. The tense exchanges came hours after a NATO fighter jet shot down a stray Ukrainian drone over Estonia, which Kiev said it had been jammed and detoured by Russia. And I think that's. But here we go. This is Latvia's UN representative. She's the one who gets to sit on the UN Security Council. She says she has little time for Russia's pure fiction, pure lies. I will just repeat that lies and aggressive disinformation and threats are a sign of despair and weakness, and we have seen similar lies addressed against other members of this council in the previous meeting. So I'm very honored to have drawn attention to my country today. All right. So you get the thread. Now the question is, where? Well, maybe just one. Yeah, I want to see, because I want to. What Tammy Bruce, who's the I think she's the deputy. Deputy permanent representative of the United States at the UN. Russia's Latvia says, okay, here we are. Here's Tammy Bruce. Tammy Bruce, the deputy U.S. ambassador to the UN, warned that the UN was no place for threats against a council member, and said the U.S. would keep all its NATO commitments. And that was that. All right. So you can see Tammy Bruce really didn't say anything very much. She was obviously told basically say very little, but may also make clear that the United States isn't going to get dragged into a shooting war with Russia. I mean, it cannot happen. And I think that's why, as I said, I think that's the reason why suddenly NATO is taking a very different line on these drones. They were up in the air shooting down Ukrainian drones. Clearly, this was the order that had come down from Washington: bring this thing to an end, because Russia is really making clear they're going to start hitting the Baltic states on a regular basis. And once that happens, then in a way NATO will be in the same situation as Russia has been, which is you're going to be sitting on your hands as Russia starts hitting the territory of NATO, and you're not doing anything about it. And I think they didn't really want to get themselves in a situation. They said, no, we don't want Russia to be hitting NATO territory and us just sitting here on our hands. So they said, no, basically they told Ukraine, cut it out, don't use the territory of the Baltic states to hit Russia anymore. So one other thing that I wanted to touch on, and I mentioned, we had this before on the Gaggle, how Norman Finkelstein had criticized particularly Tucker Carlson, but also I think Megyn Kelly and Candace Owens. And it was very, very odd why, on the face of it, as to why he did this. Because for somebody who is, after all, a very harsh critic of Israel, you would think that he would be very happy that suddenly, after so many years, and he himself, he's a voice in the wilderness, there's really nobody else, denouncing Israel, nobody else pointing to what Israel is doing. other than me and Chomsky. And that was the line Finkelstein says. It's just me and Chomsky. No one else. Everyone's just defends Israel. And now, seemingly you have allies, but they are figures on the right, but nonetheless they're figures who have huge following on Twitter. They have a huge following on YouTube. They have their own websites. So suddenly you've got many voices that are aligning with your position. And Finkelstein, instead of celebrating this, instead of being happy that, well, now we've got the possibility of forging a coalition within the United States against Israel, confronting Israel, because now from left to right, you've got you have influential voices saying enough already. Instead of that, Finkelstein is going out of his way to attack Tucker Carlson. And this seems very strange. I mean, if you really care so much about Israel, you need allies. You need to form alliances, because you're up against an institutional support system that backs Israel all the way. It goes from the media to the military to the security apparatus, to the politicians, particularly the politicians. So to rival such a powerful group, and then of course I need hardly bring up the billionaire class, the very wealthy lawyers who are often absolutely ardent supporters of Israel, the class of hedge fund managers, all the Bill Ackmans and all the rest. And these were the people who essentially have used their billions to crush criticism of Israel. We saw how they and he of all people, not Finkelstein, of all people, can see how they use their billions to threaten colleges, and says, well, if you don't crack down on these protests against Israel, if you don't crack down on that, we will withhold our money. And the universities naturally, boom, hey, we're not going to put up a fight. We need that money. We need that money bad. I mean, hey, we've got a new basketball court to build. We got a new tennis courts. I mean, we need we need lots of money. We need building a new lab. So we need the millions and millions from Bill Ackman and the rest. And so they cracked down on the campus protests. But now you have influential voices. Now they're on the right. They're not people who share Finkelstein's leftish attitudes, but then nonetheless on this issue they are political allies. And for somebody who cares, presumably, both about Israel and everything Israel is doing, and cares about the kind of the Israel lobby and the influence of the Israel lobby, you think, well, that's a good thing. You should be happy that we've now managed to make a breakthrough. But instead of that, Finkelstein is now attacked in quite strong terms in interview after interview after interview. He has attacked particularly Tucker Carlson. And he's attacked him in quite serious ways, because he's attacked him suggesting clearly that he's anti-Semitic, and more seriously that he's a demagogue, and even more seriously suggesting that he's some dark fascist Nazi figure who is using kind of hatred of the Jews to rise to power in the United States. So these are very strong charges, very divisive charges. If again you care so much about Israel, so he gave this interview the other day, and I want to just share a clip from that interview to give you a sense of what Finkelstein is saying. Here we are. Okay, so let's listen for a little bit.
So that being said, I'm not going to answer your question specifically with Tucker Carlson. I will answer it in a more general, but I think still concrete way. Palestine was never a cause of the right. I mean, Israel was in the sense of there were anti-Semites who didn't like Israel. Of course, I met them when I first got involved. It was clear they didn't like Israel, and they used Palestine as a way of getting at Israel. But it's never a cause of the right. Oppressed peoples, a right-wing cause. Third world people, a right-wing cause. Suffering, human suffering, a right-wing cause. Not really. It was always, I won't say always, but because there was a period where Jews were the oppressed group. And when a portion of that oppressed group decided to found their own state, that seemed a plausible response to the Nazi Holocaust. And that group all claimed to be socialists. They all claimed to be leftists. Ben-Gurion fashioned himself, and he was seen as the Zionist Lenin. That's what he was called. He was the Zionist. So for all those reasons, Israel was a left-wing cause, not the Arabs, because the Arabs were seen back then as being the Effendis, the feudalists, the kings and the pashas and all that. So they were the right wing. Now, obviously, it's changed. So since you could say roughly 1967, that's kind of the breaking point. Palestine was a left-wing cause. It was a part of it. It was solidly.
All right. Now, you can say he's saying a lot of things here. Much of this is not accurate at all. And you know, if you go back a generation, he think that Finkelstein's arguments are not dissimilar to the arguments that were mounted against Pat Buchanan in 1992 when Buchanan ran for president, and he did indeed raise the issue: why is the United States going to war on behalf of Israel? And he was attacked by the neocons, the flagship publication of the neocons, Commentary Magazine, that ran several articles, notably an article by Joshua Moravchik, Patrick Buchanan, and the Jews. And Buchanan and Moravchik wrote there that Buchanan couldn't care less. He absolutely doesn't care about oppressed people. He doesn't care about human suffering. He's never supported any third world movement in the indigenous people, anything like that. Why is he suddenly so concerned about the plight of the Palestinians? Obviously, he's motivated by hatred of the Jews. And that was quite effective. It was this was a long time ago. The number of media outlets was quite limited in 1992, and an attack from the flagship publication of the American Jewish Committee, which is Commentary Magazine, edited by Norman Podhoretz, one of the founders of neoconservatism, had an effect. And Buchanan's 1992 campaign tanked, and Buchanan never really recovered. But what's important there is to recall is that Buchanan did indeed make that very point. Oh, they don't, Finkelstein says, oh, the right, they don't care about national liberation. They don't care about indigenous people. They don't care about the third world. That's all. The human suffering. They don't care. What Buchanan said: the Palestinians have as much right to statehood as the Israelis have. Now, obviously, you could say that they have more of a right, but leave that aside for the moment. But he made specific that point. If you're going to make the case that the Jews are entitled to a state of their own, why do you deny the Palestinians a state of their own? And that was said by Patrick J. Buchanan, who was indeed a figure on the right and a paleo-conservative par excellence. So Finkelstein here is just saying, oh, well, of course, the right doesn't care about that. Well, how do you know the right doesn't care about that? And in fact, throughout this interview, and I'm not going to play that much of it because it goes on for about an hour and a half, and it's not really worth listening to. But he's always identifying that somehow we, the left, that's him, the left, we are the only ones who care about making the lives of people better. We are the ones who adopted the Factory Act. We are the ones who brought in the 8-hour workday. We are the ones who abolished child labor. We are the ones who, created the social safety nets. We are the ones who created the welfare state. We are the ones who ameliorated working conditions. We are the ones who kind of abolished slavery. All these fantastic things we did on the left. Absolute crap. Absolute total crap. The left did contribute, but the right contributed even more. If you look at the whole history of social reform, particularly in Great Britain in the 19th century, much of it was driven by conservatives, by the Tories. Now, you could say that their motives were driven by a fear of revolution. Maybe they were also they had a sense of this Tory paternalism, that they had a responsibility to look after the poor on their manor and so on. You can argue all of that, but nonetheless, if you go through the history of legislation that ameliorated the suffering of ordinary people, well, they were quite often they were driven by conservatives who actually passed that, all those pieces of legislation. They were the ones they were never wedded to the idea of a free market. On the contrary, they saw the responsibility of government to interfere in the free market. The free market was only supported by kind of liberals, kind of business industrial elites. They thought, hey, the free market, government should not mess around with the mechanisms of the free market. But conservatives never adopted that position. So much of the sort of social legislation, such as the Factory Act, to ameliorate these horrific conditions, this was driven by conservatives. So Finkelstein wants to do this whole more lefty than thou. I'm with the left. We did all these fantastic things, and we don't want to have anything to do with the right. So historically, he's just simply wrong. He's wrong on the issue of Israel and Palestine. There were indeed figures on the right who did support the cause of Palestine. And for him to say, oh, this is already anti-Semitic, it was not anti-Semitic. There were many people, the Tories in Great Britain, who were very pissed off about the Jews. They were very pissed off about the Jews in Palestine because these Jews, these Zionists, like Menachem Begin, had gone around assassinating British political leaders, had gone around assassinating British military people. They didn't particularly like that. This wasn't anti-Semitism. This wasn't particular fondness for Arab feudal lords or whatever. This was just, they didn't care for it. Remember, Menachem Begin from the Irgun was banned from entering Great Britain all the way up to 1977 when he became Prime Minister of Israel. At that moment, he was now Prime Minister, they had to lift the ban on him entering. But there was a reason why they had a ban on Menachem Begin entering the country, because they regarded him as a terrorist. Anyway, let's watch a little bit more.
In the left trajectory, national liberation struggle, armed struggle, suffering of oppressed peoples, third world struggle. So it felt naturally, as I said, in my historic tradition. But now suddenly, it's become a rallying cause. The main exponents of criticism of Israel, the left no longer has any salience, because it has no salience in the podcast world whatsoever. The closest thing to a left person in the podcast world is only one. It's Mehdi Hassan, and he's not even a left. He's not a person of the left by any stretch of the imagination. He's just, he's articulate, but he's just a careerist. He goes which way the wind blows. In the UK, he joined a struggle against anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. When Jeremy Corbyn was there, he teamed up with, of all people, Jonathan Friedman from the Guardian, wrote a joint letter with Friedman and talked about, And then in New York, I should say in the US, he was supporting Mamdani against the charges of anti-Semitism. He just blows with the wind. He assesses the political forces, and he just goes with whichever way the wind is blowing. And he's the only person, even remotely of the left in the podcast world. And so all the leading and sharp critics of Israel are now the right wing. It's Tucker Carlson. It's
I should say, though, his diagnosis of Mehdi Hassan is actually spot on. Mehdi Hassan is a man. He's a smart guy, very articulate. But he absolutely does go with whichever way the wind is blowing. Yeah, he always wants to be with the fashionable people spouting fashionable platitudes. So he kind of figures out, whether when he's in Great Britain or whether he's in the United States, which position are the fashionable people adopting, and he's there to adopt that position. So yeah, he's Finkelstein is absolutely right in what he says about Mehdi Hassan. Let's watch this a bit more.
Candace Owens, it's Megyn Kelly, it's what's his name, Joe Kent. It's all right wingers. And so you have to ask the question, if national liberation, human suffering, oppressed peoples, right to self-determination of people, if that's not their animating impulse, because those are left-wing slogans and political agendas, what is? Why do they suddenly become obsessed? You listen to Tucker Carlson now, there's barely a conversation which is not about Israel. Why do they suddenly become obsessed with that? And I consider that a troubling development, because it's very easy to imagine a Tucker Carlson running for president in 2028 on the platform of the real America first, because now he's saying Trump abandoned that slogan. He's betrayed his campaign promises. A campaign platform of the real America first and the wire pullers who are controlling our country. Those outsiders with internal support, what was called, beginning with the Spanish Civil War, they were called the Fifth.
All right. Now, notice what he has done here. He's saying, obviously, Tucker Carlson is a figure on the right, cannot possibly be motivated by any of these noble impulses like what I, as a figure on the left, am motivated by, because I, of course, care a great deal about national liberation and and the right of self-determination and all this. Tucker Carlson, cannot possibly be motivated by such impulses. He's obviously a much lower person than I am. And he says, well, what's motivating him? Well, he's obviously doing the dark. He's calling forth the dark forces of America. He's calling forth the sense that that there are the wire pullers. Or who are the wire pullers? Well, of course, the Jews. So he's calling forth an American uprising against, yes, the Jews, the Jewish wire pullers. And that can only be the motivation of Tucker Carlson, because why is he so obsessed with Israel? Well, let me think. He may be, I don't know, just a wild guess. He may be obsessed with Israel because right now the United States is engaged in a bizarre, totally destructive for the United States, destructive for the world, war against Iran. And he's asks, how did this come about? Why would the United States risk so much? Why would Trump essentially, sacrifice his presidency for this cause that has really nothing to do with American interests? I mean, Iran doesn't have anything to do with American interests. Iran poses no threat to the United States. So why is it doing it? And you can't discuss that without, you know, reaching for um, the influence of the Israel lobby. Now, no, again, no one here talks about the Jews. Tucker Carlson has never talked about the Jews. He's talking about Israel, the influence of Israel. But you see, Finkelstein wants to insist, and he does this all the time. He wants to insist that no, United States is not dragged into these wars in the Middle East because of Israel. So why is it dragged into these wars into the Middle East? Why is it? On the face of it, the United States would have a very good time of it, in the Middle East. Most of the countries in the Middle East are actually very well disposed to the United States, and always were, even during the Cold War. I mean, they much rather um, have good relations with the United States, even when they maintained good relations with the Soviet Union. They never liked the Soviet Union. They never liked the communists. This is just, if anything was alien to the world, to the Middle Eastern world, it was communism. But nonetheless, they did have a good relation with the Soviet Union, because the Soviet Union was the only power that seemed to care at all about the plight of the Palestinians. So the question then is, well, why are why is the United States so predisposed to very dangerous, very reckless actions in the Middle East, in pursuit of goals that really don't do anything for the United States? And so obviously, you had the Walton Mearsheimer, and indeed we look upon it in common sense and say it's Israel. It's the influence of the Israel lobby. It's the entire kind of intermeshing of Israeli and American think tanks, Israeli and American intelligence. But these are Israeli goals that America is pursuing. It is Israel that wants to see regime change in Iran. But neither Finkelstein nor Chomsky, and Chomsky is really the kind of the thinker behind all of this, has ever accepted that these wars are in the Middle East are pursued in the interest of Israel. They will say, "Oh, no, it's always the United States. Israel is just America's cat's paw. It's America that's driving this." Well, there's no evidence for this. There's just simply no evidence that, all of the evidence is that it's Israel. I mean, we discussed yesterday in the live stream that interview of Robert Gates, the guy who had been around forever, seems to have had a senior position in the US government since forever. He was George W. Bush's defense secretary, and then he was Obama's defense secretary. And he recounted, both in that interview on Face the Nation and in his book, he recounted how Benjamin Netanyahu was trying to persuade the United States to hit Iran. And he was saying, he was using exactly the same arguments that he was to use, was it in that 2009? So that would be in 17 years later with Trump, that Iran is very vulnerable. You hit Iran and it will collapse. It didn't work. It didn't work with George W. Bush. Bush didn't go down that path. Bill Clinton didn't go down the path. Trump, he found already a voice there. But Finkelstein isn't prepared to accept that. He wants to say, "Oh no, everything is done by the United States. Israel is just not really not really that important in all of this. Israel just does what America wants it to do. America is calling the shots here, and these allies. So instead of now being happy, because for the first time we have a situation where there could be a major political change in the United States. I mean, Israel has only been able to do what it's got away with because it had the United States in its corner, the unconditional support from the United States, the 535 Israeli ambassadors, all of that. And then suddenly this has changed. This is a major political development. And instead of being happy about this major political development, he is launching these attacks against Tucker Carlson, against Megyn Kelly, against Candace Owens. He's going out of his way to try to break up any possible alliance that would actually confront Israel in the future. Because once the United States cools on Israel, and that was always a possibility. It's always been historically, it's always been a possibility that one day the United States will just get fed up with Israel. Once that happens, then Israel has a lot of problems. And then when you have figures like Tucker Carlson, when you have, with Charlie Kirk, well, he's gone now, taking the line that they're taking, well, that's a major political development, and it's a serious problem for Israel down the road. But instead of being happy about that, he instead ascribes very sinister, really sinister motives to Tucker Carlson. I mean, he's basically saying he's some Hitler-like figure who's going to introduce a Nazi regime in the United States. Anyway, let's now take a look at the Gaggle locals page. This is, as I always say, this is the Gagglers who, with great generosity and great friendship, keep the Gaggle going. They do more than anyone else to make sure that the dogs are kept happy and fed and in a reasonably positive frame of mind. Because they're the ones who do all the heavy lifting here. So really appreciate them. And as I always say to people who join these live streams on YouTube or on X, please, if you want to talk to me, if you want to ask me questions, if you want me to address your thoughts and your comments, please join our Gaggles community. Please join our platform on locals. Would be really helpful for all of us. It's very easy to do. Just go to the Gaggle, one word, .locals.com, subscribe. It's very, very cheap. You can even without paying it, if you have difficulties paying, you can always become a member. It's really great if you become a member, and then you can be on the board, ask me questions, and I'd be more than happy to address your comments. So please, thegaggle.locals.com. Anyway, here is our first question from Denaki, a good friend, somebody who's one of our really very active and energetic contributors on the Gaggle, always has fascinating postings every day on the board. And Denaki says here, another day, another Moscow burning. This ain't even news anymore. Refineries, strategic complexes. Unlike Russian strikes of apartment buildings and empty warehouses, 7 million drones forecast for this year. Domestic mid-range missile. I guess the demilitarization is going perfectly. I have to say, I can't. There's nothing there that I can disagree with, Denaki, because indeed, when we look on this Russian special military operation, the objectives that Putin had set, which is demilitarization, denazification, the securing of, initially it was the Donetsk and Lugansk, but then he added the incorporation of Kherson and Zaporozhye within the Russian Federation. Russia hasn't accomplished any of those. And worse than that, I think, as you point out here, is that the these goals are further away than ever. It's not just that we have Finland and Sweden that have joined NATO since the start of the special military operation, but Ukraine is much stronger now than it was in 2022. Worse than that, Ukraine has become more enmeshed and integrated within the NATO military command structure than it was in February 2022. And more serious than that, I mean, because after all, the worst scenario possible for Russia was the deployment of missiles on Ukrainian territory. But now Ukraine has become a drone factory. I mean, Ukraine is now producing more drones than anyone else in the world. And that's just going to keep growing. I mean, Ukraine is all the time signing new deals with Germany and with other NATO states to produce more and more drones. And so these drones, even if they're not produced on Ukrainian territory, and many are, they're going to be produced somewhere else and shipped into Ukraine. So Ukraine is just going to be able to launch wave and wave of drones into Russia. So this is it's not just that Russia hasn't accomplished the goals that it set in 2022, but it's actually a much worse situation. Far from demilitarization, Ukraine is now wholly militarized, and without a change of regime in Ukraine, and I don't see that happening since no one is bothering to push Zelensky to relinquish power. I mean, he's supposed to relinquish power now. Was it in 2024? So that's already more than 2 years have elapsed since since he was supposed to have had elections. So, and no one's pressing him to quit. So, whatever the final outcome will be, and it doesn't look now as if there's going to be any final outcome anytime soon. Whatever the final outcome will be, Ukraine will be much stronger at the end than it was at the beginning, which means that whatever temporary agreement is signed, Ukraine and of course NATO will be preparing for the next round of attacks on Russia, and they'll obviously be in a good position to launch those attacks because they're going to have millions upon millions of drones. They can just simply unleash wave after wave of these drone attacks in the future. And so, in terms of this great thing, this great victory that many had been predicting, and we seem to be rather a long way from that. And it isn't clear how we can bring this thing to a successful conclusion, because, as I said, Ukraine has not run out of manpower, and I don't think Ukraine will run out of manpower. There are always places where you can find people. There's no shortage of human bodies on this planet. You can always, if you need human bodies, you're going to find human bodies on this planet. So if Ukraine needs to replenish its forces, it's going to find those, somewhere warm bodies to replenish its forces. So yeah, I think as you said, this demilitarization is going perfectly. So yes. Anyway, Danaki then goes on, and is NATO dead yet? Is deindustrialized Europe frozen to death already? Is the world de-dollarized? And last but not least, go Massey, if only just to spite Orange Man. So yes, I agree with you. NATO is not dead. And I think, as we discussed, it wasn't last week, I think 2 weeks ago, it's clear that, to the contrary, NATO is getting stronger, and particularly a more menacing NATO than before, because now you're going to have a German dominated Europe, with Germany now taking seriously its militarization. And of course, yes, there are plenty of voices saying, "Oh, it can't happen. Germany doesn't have the money. Germany doesn't have the industrial power." All as well. You can always find money from somewhere. Governments have always been able to find money from somewhere. Germany, you know, you got all these things about how Germany is this, backwater and it's failing. It's the number three economy in the world. It's United States, China, number three, Germany. It's ahead of Japan. So I wouldn't count Germany out just yet. So you know, uh, uh, it's a division of responsibilities. The United States is not going away anywhere from Europe. It's just shifting its attention elsewhere, where they think, hey, well, this is where we can project our power. But ultimately, NATO will still be under U.S. command. U.S. is in control of the military structure. U.S. has the airlift capability. U.S. has the missile capability, but the the hard grunt work will be done by the Europeans and particularly by the Germans. So no, NATO is not dead. I don't think Europe is deindustrialized, and I'm afraid, in terms of are we near the beginning of the end of the war? No, I really don't. I think this war is going to go on for quite a long time yet, and with predictable catastrophic results. Quite agree with you about Thomas Massey. I hope he wins. It's a close race, but he seems to be ahead. But who the hell knows? But I do hope that he pulls this off. Anyway, thank you, Danaki. And then here is a good friend, Cynthia. Cynthia, film scholar, film expert, film encyclopedist, with a fantastic, amazing knowledge of the minutiae of filmmaking, the minutiae of film history, and who graces the Gaggle with her film expertise. So we're always very fortunate to enjoy her very learned and informed commentary on the films that we screen here. And so every week we have uh, great films, but they're particularly special because Cynthia provides us with just extraordinarily detailed insights into the film. So currently, we're screening. It's on our locals page. We're screening White Mischief, which is based on a murder that took place in Kenya in the 1940s, and there was a book written about it, and then there was a film made based on this book by James Fox, and it has some excellent actors: Greta Scacchi, Joss Ackland, um, uh, Trevor Howard, John Hurt. So very, really first rate, first rate English cast. Very well done. As the English know how to make these types of films really well, with excellent costumes, social ambience. A little slow. I mean, but it depends on whether you like these British historic dramas. I rather do, particularly when you mix murder with costumes and parties and socializing. Those things can be a lot of fun. But anyway, watch this movie, and please, really, take the time to read Cynthia's comments. I mean, I always learn so much from them, and I thought I knew something about White Mischief, but as always, I learned a great deal from Cynthia's insightful observations. So thank you, Cynthia. And so her question today is: does comparing Kenya's Happy Valley to modern Dubai show how regional revolts exploit the core vulnerability of rich elite bubbles, matching the Mau Mau uprising with Iran's axis of resistance, reveals that extreme wealth blinds rulers to nearby anger because these luxury hubs rely on the safe image to attract foreign cash and workers. Asymmetric attacks do more than damage infrastructure. They shatter the fragile social illusion holding the economy together. I think that's very well put. Um, I think the problem with the declining British Empire was that the people who were living in these places, enjoying a rather nice life, didn't really think that this was all going to come to an end very quickly. They should have done. They should have done. They should have realized that this war that Britain was engaged in against Germany was going to bankrupt Britain. They thought, hey, well, this is the empire on which the sun never sets. It was a fatuous illusion that an empire could go on forever. And so they thought, yeah, yes, some of the natives were giving the problems, and the Mau Mau and everything else, but they believed perfectly reasonably that, of course, the British, as the avatars of Western civilization, particularly Western industrial power, and therefore vast Western technological superiority, will indeed crush the Mau Mau or crush any rebellion. And indeed, that would have been the case. But of course, indigenous revolts will be put down with ease by the powers that have the overwhelming technological superiority. I mean, there's, no question about that. What they didn't fully appreciate was that the British government would not continue with this fight. That the British government would decide that it wasn't worth keeping the colonies. It wasn't this. The empire wasn't worth the candle, because Britain just no longer had the money. It no longer had the money that was needed to maintain the empire, to maintain a vast military presence that was necessary to keep a presence in empire. So one by one, the British started giving up their colonial possessions. So first, after World War II, it was India, 1948, and then they began giving up their possessions in Asia, or the possessions like Malaysia and Burma, and then it was the time for Africa, and that took place in the late 1950s. And in the 1950s and 1960s, they gave up every position in Africa, including Kenya. But Kenya was a kind of an interesting case, because actually they the man who took over in Kenya had been in the Mau Mau. This is Jomo Kenyatta, and he turned out to be actually quite a good leader. He didn't go over the top crazy. He knew that he would need the expertise of the British, basically the expertise of the European colonial settlers, in order to govern the country and in order to progress economically. So Kenyatta was actually quite a good political leader in Africa. There were some really lousy leaders in Africa, but Kenyatta was actually one of the better ones. Then after the British gave up their possessions in Africa, that was the time for east of Suez, and the British gave up their positions east of Suez, and then and then they created the state of the UAE. So that was Kuwait and so on, but particularly the UAE, which was indeed created by the British. This united all these sheikdoms. But the British really had no military ability to do anything for the UAE. And almost from the beginning, the UAE was militarily completely useless. I mean, ineffectual, had no ability to defend itself. So the first thing that happened when the UAE became a kind of an independent state was that Iran, then still ruled by the Shah, they took a piece of its territory. The British just looked the other way. They were not going to go to war against the Shah of Iran, and so they allowed Iran to take a chunk of the UAE. Well, nothing much has changed since then. The UAE still has um, terrible relations with Iran. All kinds of, UAE has revenge fantasies. It would certainly like to get some of its territory back against from Iran, but the Ayatollahs are, are not in the mood and have never been in the mood to make any concessions to return to UAE what had been taken from them by the Shah of Iran. So that, basically the Americans essentially took over from the British that the what that was called East of Suez, the positions of the East of Suez, and the Americans then became the power in the Persian Gulf. The British gave all that up, and the Americans took over. And it was the Nixon administration had actually tried to persuade Harold Wilson's government and then Edward Heath's government to maintain their position east of Suez, but they said, "Hey, we don't have any money." So just as the British gave up their colonies in Africa, they gave up their positions east of Suez, but nonetheless the Americans then stepped forward. Um, the I guess the lesson there is that you can live your fantasy life as long as somebody is going to um, protect you. Somebody is going to be there to step in and defend you. Now, those British settlers, colonial settlers, who were living this very nice life in Kenya, had assumed that the British government, would be there forever, protecting them. They really weren't expecting. They should have, but they weren't expecting. Then in 1940, that the British Empire would be gone within within 20 years. It would just be gone, disappear. This great fantastic empire would just be gone within 20 years. And then once they were gone, there really wasn't anybody to protect them, and then therefore they had to um, leave in many cases. But I think there's a similarity with these Gulf kingdoms. Somebody is going to have to protect them. And I think it's a serious issue. I mean, just simply saying, "Oh, the Americans should just withdraw from the Persian Gulf." Well, it's not going to happen. And even if the Americans were to withdraw, these tiny states, Kuwait, Qatar, UAE. Well, who is going to protect them? I mean, I mean, they can't fight their way out of a paper bag. Somebody has to protect them. The idea that the Americans are just going to go and now they're going to rely completely on Iran, but that isn't going to happen. So there has to be some realism about this. When you create these artificial states, they can only survive if there's some means of protecting them. So somebody has to protect them from Iran. Somebody has to protect them from one another. Saudi Arabia, certainly Saudi Arabia has been a very aggressive local player. Somebody has to protect them against Israel. So somebody's going to have to do it. You can't just go on happily making money and think that this is going to go on forever and ever. Anyway, thank you, Cynthia, for that. Anyway, Cynthia then goes on. How do liberal and conservative Zionists differ, and who are some prominent figures within each group? And are both camps fundamentally on the same page regarding the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians and neighboring populations who defy Israeli hegemony? Well, my own feeling is that the only difference between them is that the liberal Zionists just want this they want it done gently. They don't want embarrassing newspaper headlines. So they share the goals, um, but they want it hidden from public view. I mean, the liberal Zionists would more or less take the view that, oh, well, we need a kind of the two-state solution. Okay, fantastic. Um, Conservative Zionists don't really even pretend to subscribe to that. So liberal Zionists say, yeah, we want the two-state solution. Okay. Well, the only way you can have a two-state solution is if Israel gives up some serious territory. Are you prepared to see Israel give up some serious territory? Well, I don't know, maybe, maybe not. But it's basically these Palestinians. They're not. You can't deal with them. You can't. They're unreasonable. But maybe someday, when we get a reasonable Palestinian leadership, then we can start talking about giving up territory. But now is not the right time, and that's it. And that's what it always boils down to. Since liberal Zionists they purport to support a two-state solution, but they're not really serious about giving up the territory that would be necessary for a Palestinian state. And so they change the subject and start talking about the Palestinian leadership and why they're so unreasonable, and well, the Palestinian Authority, they're corrupt. Hamas, they're of course all loonies, and so on. So we don't have to do anything because we don't have any partner to negotiate. Conservative Zionists, I think, they I think want the. I mean, they don't even pretend to support a two-state solution. They essentially want the the entire territory of Palestine, at the very least, the entire territory of mandatory Palestine to be the state of Israel. Maybe even more than that, because if you recall, in that interview, the famous interview of Mike Huckabee with Tucker Carlson, he seemed to suggest that the state of Israel should comprise a hell of a lot more than mandatory Palestine. So that I think is the conservative Zionist position. I suspect Huckabee is probably at the extreme end of conservative Zionism, but yeah, no question. At the very least, they want to see mandatory Palestine as the state of Israel, and the Palestinians would just somehow disappear somewhere or other. They would just go somewhere else. So that's regarding ethnic cleansing. So I think that so in one case, the liberal Zionists, they just don't want anything done, and they want to just continue with this status quo and hope that the Palestinians will just go away somewhere. Conservative Zionists, I think they actually support the ongoing ethnic cleansing, and they want more of it. Anyway, thank you so much, Cynthia. Robert, always very good to see you, Robert. Hope you're well. Wonder what you think of today's primaries. And happily, Robert asked the question here about Thomas Massey. He says, maybe George can comment on whether the attempt to take out Thomas Massey isn't part of the broader Western pattern where democracy is now seriously stage managed. Well, that's very interesting. And I think that yeah, I hadn't really seen that argument presented, but it is very similar to what is being done. It's like you essentially you move in to whether it's a country, a state, or in this case, it's just simply a district in Kentucky, and you mount a ferocious campaign. Of course, a lot of money changes hands, but there is this giant propaganda machine, which is just grinds out, this the fairy tale after fairy tale after fairy tale, which without question has an effect. I mean, it's the absolute avalanche of negative stories, negative publicity about Thomas Massey will have an effect. I mean, it's already had an effect. I mean, the polls have it that Massey has a slight lead in a district that Massey has always won very comfortably. He's always won the Republican primaries very comfortably. Now he's really in the fight for his life. And this is all about outsiders coming in and trying to rig the election. And it is similar to what happened in the case of, let's say, most recently of Viktor Orban, because a lot of money came into this election. We still don't exactly know where all the money that Peter Magyar came from. I mean, there was a lot of money that went into TISA. Where did they get that money from? So we don't know. But leave that aside for a moment. We had the money that was used by the European Commission. So first of all, they withheld money that was owed to Hungary. So Hungary didn't get any money. 30 billion euros. That's a lot of money for a small country such as Hungary. Then the European Commission, in collusion with Ukraine, withheld oil deliveries for Hungary. So no oil for Hungary, with the clear threat that if Hungary votes for Orban, forget about getting any oil. They're not going to get any oil through the Druzhba pipeline. And you're not going to get this 30 billion euros. So that was already, they used the coercive power of money. And then Europe also used the social media by doing the whole fact checking. So there was the constant European intervention by fact checking any claims made by Fidesz, but there was no fact checking of any of the claims made by TISA. So absolutely, this is like a stage managed democracy. So that whenever there's any kind of a populist figure, I mean, I'm not. I wouldn't really call Thomas Massey exactly a populist. But I think Viktor Orban was very much a populist. But anyone who clearly threatens the establishment, the mechanism of the political establishment can be extremely devastating. When you're using serious money in this way, you're going to have an effect. So I mean, what I find interesting, of course, in the case of Massey is, which I think is the unusual part of it, is why Trump has seems to just hate Massey with such hysterical vituperation. I mean, it's like he's just sending out one crazed truth after another, making all these ridiculous denunciation. I mean, you're calling Massey stupid. I mean, the guy has 2 degrees from MIT, calling him stupid. It's just extraordinary. Now, and of course, all the lies that Trump puts forward, like, oh, he's always votes against the Republican Party, which he doesn't. I mean, he may be a difficult person, but he's a very principled person. I mean, he's a libertarian, and he sticks to his guns. I mean, I like much of what Massey does. I didn't like what he did on Epstein. I thought that was beneath him. I thought that, I don't know why he got involved in the whole thing. I think he threw around a lot of accusations. The kind of thing that a libertarian should normally avoid. But okay, that's one issue. You can't, I like him a lot on a lot of other issues, and I hope he wins. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a very good point, and I think we're going to see more of that, and we're already seeing it in the case of the French election, where, I mean, we know what's happened to Marine Le Pen. She won't be able to run, as things stand, as president. But now they're making their move. We talked about this, I think, last week, against Jordan Bardella, the man who's going to take her place as the national rally's presidential candidate next year, but now they're already making their move against him, trying to open criminal cases against him. So there's definitely a pattern here. Anyway, thank you so much, Robert. And Samba Petros, good to see you again. Thank you so much. And he says, are the Russians and Putin about to fold on the Ukraine war, as is being suggested by a number of sources? I don't know whether they are. Um, the noises that they're making, and they've made these noises before, that that somehow they're going to come to a deal with Trump. I don't think there's anything new about that. They still, they still talk about the spirit of Anchorage. That some kind of understandings were reached with Trump in Alaska last year, and they're still hoping for some return to that. I think it's a vain hope, absolutely vain hope, because I don't think Trump ever really made any commitments to the Russians. Um, it sounds to me like the Russians put forward a series of um, demands and conditions. Trump didn't seem to raise any particularly strong objections. Russians, I think, took it that as a tacit agreement on Trump's part with Russia's positions, and then they talk about the spirit of Anchorage. I don't think Trump's going to do much for Russia. I don't think he sees any need to do so. I don't think he thinks very highly of Russia. I think he thinks that Russia should have won this war a long time ago. And if Russia didn't win the war, if Russia realized sometime in 2022 that this war cannot be won without a massive escalation, without a massive military and industrial commitment, once Russia realized that, then Russia should have tried to find a way out. I think that's what Trump's thinking is, and in a way, it's kind of what he's doing with Iran. He realized early April that this war isn't going well for him, and since then, he's been trying to find a way to get out of it. But let's keep in mind, I mean, we're all trashing Trump and we're trashing the Iran policy, and with some, with a lot of justification. But basically, there hasn't been any shooting, there hasn't been any kinetic action since early April. So this whole thing has only been going on since February the 28th, which is less than 3 months. The Russian war has been going on for 4 years. So I think Trump just doesn't take Russia, that he doesn't think very highly of Russia. I mean, that's what he said in China. It's just us two. We are the two superpowers, United States and China. He really doesn't think Russia belongs in that league, and so I don't think there's any real pressure on Trump to bring this war to an end, to an end that the Russians would be happy with. But I don't think Russia can give up. I don't think Putin can survive politically if he were to essentially give up without having accomplished any of his goals. I mean, we're talking about the casualties that Russia has sustained. I mean, it's horrific. And if he essentially would be in the position of accepting a deal that basically he could have he could have achieved without even starting the whole special military operation, I don't think he can survive politically. There'd just be too much public anger, and he would have to be replaced by somebody else. So that's why I don't see any conclusion to this war anytime soon. I mean, I don't think Russia. I think Russia would like to find some kind of a formula. They hope Trump could find the formula, but short of that, I don't think it's they're going to give up. They can't and survive. And then Marty, always very good to see you. And then here, Marty has Marty has a very nice quote from Aldous Huxley, from Brave New World Revisited. I'll just read a little bit of it. So, by means of ever more effective methods of mind manipulation, the democracies will change their nature. The quaint old forms, elections, parliaments, Supreme Courts, and all the rest will remain. The underlying substance will be a new kind of non-violent totalitarianism. All the traditional names, all the hallowed slogans will remain exactly what they were in the good old days. Democracy and freedom will be the theme of every broadcast and editorial, yeah. But democracy and freedom in a strictly Pickwickian sense. Meanwhile, the ruling oligarchy and its highly trained elite of soldiers, policemen, thought manufacturers, and mind manipulators will quietly run the show as they see fit. That's rather good. I like that. That's very good. Thank you so much, Marty, for sharing that. That's really nice. Thank you. I think we should do that. We should do Brave New World Revisited as a Gaggle book club. I think that would be a good book club. Okay, and here Marty presents us with a picture of um, Ursula von der Leyen standing next to Angela Merkel. Angela Merkel collected some kind of a prize. When you reach a certain position in European and American statecraft, then you spend the latter days of your life collecting a variety of prizes and awards. You take part in all these ceremonies. I mean, nobody knows what Angela Merkel has done to merit any prize or any award. I mean, she was a pretty mediocre chancellor, and was actually quite disastrous in much of what she did. But she's just collecting these awards, as Hillary Clinton collects these awards, as Madeleine Albright used to collect these awards, and doubtless when Ursula von der Leyen retires, she'll go on collecting all these awards. And, to Angela Merkel's left is a particularly dim-witted person who looks particularly dim-witted in this photograph is Roberta Metsola. Who's Roberta Metsola? She is the Speaker of the European Parliament, an absolute dimwit. And I think her facial expression is, befits her. And then behind them, standing behind them, I don't recognize everybody, but the one person I do recognize, a truly disgusting human being, and that is Javier Solana. He is standing right behind Angela Merkel. Javier Solana, who was the Secretary General of NATO during the NATO bombing of Yugoslavia, and he would come on every day talking absolute garbage, peddling every kind of nonsensical claim about all the horrors that the Serbs are perpetrating. He would, every single lie about the Serbs, he would regurgitate. And Javier Solana, he actually, in one of his news conferences, actually gave credence to one of the most ridiculous propaganda tropes of the era, which is Operation Horseshit. It was actually Operation Horseshoe, but horseshit is the appropriate designation. This was supposedly a military plan that the Serbs had in order to drive out the Albanians. Obviously, this came from Bulgarian. As it turned out, it came from Bulgarian intelligence, which means that obviously it came from either German or British intelligence. But as people found almost immediately, the language here was not Serbian, but sounded more like Bulgarian, Serbian. So no Serb would use the words that we used in Operation Horseshit. But Javier Solana gave credence to it and read it all out and during one of his news conferences. So trashy was this Operation Horseshit that even the ICTY never tried to introduce it as evidence in any of its cases. So there he is. I didn't even know Javier Solana was still alive. So I can't say that it's exactly good news from Marty that he's still obviously alive, but there he is. So thank you anyway for that picture. Um, and so anyway, here. And then we have, and Anne Marie, thank you so much, Anne Marie. Thank you as always for your generosity. Anne Marie was a, classical musician extraordinaire. She's a internationally renowned violinist, plays in very distinguished orchestras, has played in some of the most famous orchestras in the world, has played with some of the most famous musical creators, musical conductors, composers of the 20th and 21st centuries, and she, provides us with our classical musical briefings. So, just like Cynthia provides us with briefings on the history of cinema, Anne Marie provides us with insights and thought-provoking ideas about classical music, and particularly the playing of classical music, the difficulties and challenges of, of playing, composing, conducting at the highest international level. So not playing at the Police Benevolent Fund, but playing with orchestras conducted by some of the most famous conductors. And I always find it just amazing. And Anne Marie kind of provides us with this insights and fascinating descriptions of her experiences. So we get to learn so much about the performance of very challenging works at the highest levels. So thank you so much for that, Anne Marie. Really appreciate your generosity to the Gaggle, and appreciate all of your musical comments and observations. Thank you. And then we have Aristotle 1, and Aristotle says, would contend that the idea of the Epstein class of masters of the universe is a wonderful result for the common consciousness, likely true in generality, but truth is not an important thing. It is an action within the guerrilla war against global elites. That's an interesting. I don't have a problem with the characterization of the Epstein class, because there does indeed exist an Epstein class of a group of people, fabulously wealthy, who contribute very little to the public good, contribute almost nothing to the improvement of people's lives, make an awful lot of money. They make an awful lot of money, and we never actually know what it is that they do in order to merit this huge amount of money. I mean, what exactly did Jeffrey Epstein do to merit this fabulous wealth that he had? He didn't do anything. I mean, so we look at this world of hedge fund managers and the various hangers-on, like Mandelson. I mean, he would just be able to get interest-free loans from his rich friends. Well, that's very nice. And so, yes, I like the idea of the Epstein class, that this group of people, even though they don't necessarily revolve around Jeffrey Epstein, but that there exist people who do very little that's productive, do very little that's socially useful, do very little to improve people's lives, but somehow they manage to make money, and they exert generally a very malevolent influence. And when you say that this is it's got a part of guerrilla war against globalist elites, I hope that's the case, and maybe that there is. I mean, the instability that now prevails in the United Kingdom, which is very different from what used to be the case in the UK. I mean, it was always a fount of stability. I mean, they really, you know, prime ministers would stay on through their terms. Often they would get re-elected. They would put in a lengthy innings. This has changed, and so maybe that there is a fundamental instability in among these classes, and then yeah, I think there is a thorough disenchantment. Whether I wouldn't necessarily put it like Epstein class. Many people don't know what that's referring to, but there's a disenchantment with political elites who feather their own nests, but don't seem to do very much to improve the lives of anyone else. I think so. If you want to call it Epstein class, I'm happy to do so. But I think that there is now a serious disenchantment. And what's interesting, I think, is what happens after Trump. I mean, Trump gave voice to that disenchantment. Trump gave voice to that disgust. That's how he swept to power. But now I think a very serious disappointment will set in. That all the hopes that were vested in Trump have now been dashed. What happens now? What is politics like after Trump? Do we just go back to the pre-Trump world? I don't think so. So what happens when one populist turns out to be a dud? I don't know. I mean, I think that's going to be the question for the future. Anyway, and then Aristotle says Huxley's letter to Orwell available online is interesting. Okay, that's interesting. All right, so I think I've gone on for some time. Thank you, everybody who had joined me. Thank you for so many fascinating questions and observations. I really enjoyed them. Please, as I say to everyone who was on YouTube or was on X and follows us along, I appreciate your joining us, but it would be so much more useful if you could join the Gaggle, gaggle.locals.com. Ideally, you would put in this minimal subscription, but even if you don't have the money for the subscription, just join. It's a great community. You won't regret it. I think, as I think we've seen from the various comments or from the Gagglers, what a fascinating group the Gagglers are. So always enjoyable, and I'm always learning something from them. Anyway, thank you so much for this evening. We'll be back on Thursday, same time, 3 p.m. Eastern time. Until then, all the best. Good night. Bye-bye.